Good evening. Tonight's story is called The Glimmering Depths. So, settle into your cozy bed, wrap yourself in warmth, and close your eyes as we begin our journey beneath the ocean waves. Far below the surface of the azure sea, hidden from the chaos of the world above, there lies a city like no other, Lunaris. This was not a city born from the soil or carved from mountains, but rather a masterpiece sculpted from dreams and the shimmering embrace of the ocean. The city's heart was a grand dome of crystal, so vast and transparent that it seemed the waters above were a ceiling of liquid sapphire. Light filtered through the dome, casting dancing patterns on the streets below, making the cobblestones glisten as though they were paved with stardust. In Lunaris, every building was a marvel of artistry and ingenuity. Tall, spired towers reflected the tranquil blues and greens of the sea, while sprawling gardens bloomed with luminous underwater flora, plants that glowed softly, painting the city in hues of silver and violet when the artificial sun dimmed for the night. The streets were alive with gentle sounds, the melodic hum of currents flowing past the dome, the quiet murmur of laughter from open cafes, and the distant chime of bells signaling the passage of time. Life in Lunaris was a serene rhythm, a harmonious dance between human creation and nature's embrace. The people of Lunaris often spoke of the dome as though it were alive. It was more than just a structure. It was the protector of their dreams, a guardian keeping the ocean's vastness at bay. The dome was crafted from an unbreakable material known as aqualium, a discovery made in the early 24th century. This magical substance absorbed the energy of the ocean's currents, powering the city while casting a soft, ethereal glow throughout the day. For Aris, a young historian working at the Oceanic Archives, the dome was more than a marvel of science. It was a canvas of mystery. Legends whispered that within its crystalline walls lay hidden symbols and maps leading to secrets buried deep in the ocean floor. Aris spent hours each day poring over ancient documents, piecing together clues about the origins of Lunaris. One evening, as the artificial sunset bathed the city in golden light, Aris discovered an unusual sketch in an old journal. It depicted a glowing path beneath the city, leading toward the ocean's darkest depths. The entry was dated centuries before the city was founded, yet it described Lunaris in uncanny detail. His curiosity ignited, Aris decided to explore the edges of the dome. Beneath the bustling streets and serene gardens, there was an older, quieter Lunaris, layers of forgotten corridors and sealed chambers built during the city's earliest days. He set out with a small lantern, its gentle light guiding him through the hidden pathways. Aris's lantern cast flickering shadows along the ancient corridors. The air was damp, carrying a faint, salty tang that reminded him of the ocean just beyond the dome. These passages, long forgotten by the citizens of Lunaris, were once bustling with workers who had helped build the great city. Now they were silent, their walls etched with faded markings that spoke of a different time. As he ventured deeper, Aris noticed strange symbols carved into the stone. They resembled flowing waves and constellations, as though someone had mapped the stars alongside the movements of the sea. He traced his fingers over one of the carvings, and for a moment he thought he felt it pulse, like a heartbeat. "Just my imagination," he muttered, though his pulse quickened. The journal he had found mentioned a hidden chamber, one that predated Lunaris itself. It was said to contain the Pearl of Eternity, an artifact whispered about in bedtime stories. According to legend, this pearl wasn't just beautiful, It was alive, holding the memory of the ocean's oldest secrets. Aris followed the carvings, which grew more intricate the further he walked. The path led him to a small doorway, half hidden behind a curtain of glowing kelp that had somehow grown through a crack in the dome. He pushed the kelp aside and stepped through. Inside was a circular room, its walls shimmering as though coated in liquid silver. In the center, resting on a pedestal made of coral, soft was a sphere that glowed faintly with an inner light. The heart of the ocean beats within you, Aris. Aris approached and cautiously. It will protect you. The pearl seemed to hum. Aris staggered back as the images subsided. It was more his breath unsteady. The pearl of eternity dimmed. Its glow grew softening to a gentle enveloping him in a sensation like the rhythm of the ocean tides. Suddenly, the words images flooded in his mind. Endless oceans of the towering waves beats within and creatures of unimaginable size and beauty. Aris had studied countless legends, but none had ever mentioned a connection between the pearl and a person. He reached out again, this time more carefully, letting his fingertips graze the surface. It was smooth and warm, unlike anything he had ever touched before. As his hand rested on the pearl, the chamber began to change. The walls, once shimmering silver, transformed into a transparent shell, revealing the vast ocean outside. Schools of luminous fish swam by in mesmerizing patterns, and the distant silhouette of a giant manta ray glided gracefully through the water. The voice returned, clearer now, as if the ocean itself were speaking to him. Lunaris is not just a city, it is a guardian, a bridge between the world above and the mysteries below. You have been chosen, Aris, to ensure its legacy endures. Aris felt a surge of responsibility, but also confusion. Chosen? He was just a historian, not a leader or a scientist. Why me? He asked aloud, his voice trembling. The pearl glowed brighter in response, and suddenly the chamber filled with images again, this time of Lunaris under threat. Cracks spiderwebbing across the dome, shadows of massive creatures circling the city, and a storm of debris swirling in the currents. No, Aris whispered. The visions felt so real, as if they were not just possibilities, but inevitable outcomes. The voice softened, reassuring him. The ocean provides for those who listen. Trust in its wisdom, and you will find the way. Aris felt a newfound determination take root within him. He didn't know how, but he had to uncover the truth behind the pearl's warning. He carefully placed it back on the coral pedestal and turned to leave the chamber, his mind racing with questions and possibilities. As he emerged into the corridors once more, the glow of his lantern seemed brighter, as if it, too, had been imbued with the pearl's energy. The path ahead was uncertain, but Aris knew one thing for sure. The fate of Lunaris, and perhaps the ocean itself, now rested in his hands. Aris returned to the surface of Lunaris, the bustling city above, unaware of the secrets lying just beneath their feet. He stepped into the plaza where towering coral sculptures reflected the soft glow of the artificial lights, and a sense of surreal normalcy greeted him. The hum of daily life was everywhere. Merchants calling out prices, children laughing, and commuters heading to their destinations. But Aris felt detached, like an invisible current was pulling him toward something greater. The Pearl of Eternity's message lingered in his thoughts, and he knew he couldn't ignore it. He decided to visit Mara, an oceanographer and an old friend who had dedicated her life to studying Lunaris's surrounding waters. If anyone could help decipher the Pearl's warning, it was her. Mara's lab was perched near the city's edge, where the dome curved down into the ocean floor. Her workspace was cluttered with maps, charts, and jars containing specimens of glowing sea creatures. She looked up as Aris entered, her eyes lighting up with curiosity. "Aris," she greeted, brushing a strand of curly hair from her face. "What brings you here? You look like you've seen a ghost." He hesitated before responding. "Maybe I have. Mara, I found something extraordinary." He explained everything: the hidden chamber, the carvings, and the pearl of eternity. Mara listened intently, her brow furrowing as he recounted the visions of Lunaris under threat. "The pearl of eternity," she murmured, her voice tinged with awe. "I've read about it in ancient texts, but I thought it was just a myth. If it's real, Aris, this could change everything we know about the ocean and Lunaris." Aris nodded. "But I don't know what to do. The pearl showed me things, terrible things. Cracks in the dome, shadows of creatures. It said I've been chosen, but I don't know why or how to stop it." Mara leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The trench ocean is vast, Aris, deeper and darker full of mysteries we've barely begun to understand. Few dared to explore. If the pearl gave you a warning, it's likely tied to the ecosystem around us. I'll need to go there. Something must be threatening the balance. Mara looked at him and retrieved a holographic map of Lunaris and its surroundings. "If you're going, you won't be going alone. Let's start with the anomalies. We'll need a submersible and there's been an increase in seismic activity near the trench to the east." As she began contacting her city directly, Aris gazed out the lab's window. The trench, it could set off a chain reaction beyond the dome. The trench awaited, its depths shrouded in mystery. And though fear gnawed at the edges of his resolve, the pearl's words anchored him. Trust in the ocean's wisdom. The days leading up to the journey were a blur of preparations. Mara worked tirelessly, coordinating with her contacts to secure a submersible capable of reaching the trench. The excitement in the air was palpable, but Aris could feel the weight of the task ahead pressing down on him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the pearls glow and heard its haunting message. "You are the one chosen." The words echoed in his mind like a call he couldn't ignore. By the time the submersible was ready, Aris had gathered a small crew: Mara, 2 seasoned divers, and a technician skilled in the operation of deep-sea vehicles. They stood at the launch dock, the sleek, dark submersible waiting in the water like a predator ready to dive into the unknown. "Ready?" Mara asked, adjusting her gear. Aris gave a nod. The sea was calm today, but the closer they got to the trench, the deeper and darker the waters would become. He could feel the pull of the abyss, an inescapable gravity that seemed to call to him. He didn't know what they would find down there, but the pearl had shown him glimpses, and the visions were growing clearer, the urgency of the mission stronger with every passing hour. As the submersible descended, the city of Lunaris slowly disappeared from view, swallowed by the vast ocean. The darkness crept in like a velvet blanket, the only light coming from the sub's headlights cutting through the blackness. The crew remained silent, the sound of the sub's engines humming in the background. Aris gazed out the window, watching the endless blue fade into inky black. The trench loomed ahead, an almost incomprehensible chasm stretching deeper than anyone had dared to explore. Legends spoke of massive sea creatures, ancient ruins, and a power buried in the dark depths that could shape the fate of the world. "We're approaching the edge," the technician's voice crackled through the comms. "Hold on tight." The submersible began to vibrate slightly as it descended deeper into the trench. The walls of the chasm seemed to close in, and Aris felt a rising pressure in his chest. There was a sense of wrongness in the air, an unnatural stillness that sent a shiver down his spine. Mara spoke up, her voice tight. "This isn't right. The currents are all wrong. Something's disturbing the flow of the water." Aris looked out the window again, his eyes narrowing. There, in the distance, a faint glow pulsed from deep within the trench. It wasn't the gentle glow of bioluminescent creatures, but something far more powerful. "That's it," Aris said, his heart racing. "The source of the disturbance. We have to get closer." As they navigated toward the glow, the pressure increased. The walls of the trench seemed to close in, and strange shadows flickered in the periphery of their vision. Aris couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Then, just as they reached the glowing spot, the submersible's lights flickered. A low rumble reverberated through the hull, and for a moment, the water around them seemed to tremble. The glow intensified, and Aris saw it, a massive, ancient structure rising from the ocean floor, covered in coral and barnacles. The submersible hovered above the ruins of an old city, its lights illuminating the colossal structures and far more elaborate than anything the city was ever discovered, its buildings towering and intricately designed. "This can't be real." But the once majestic monuments were now crumbling, voice filled overtaken by the fear. Aris's heart wound its way around the columns and archways, brighter, giving the ruins the pearl of eternity otherworldly beauty. To this ancient city, Aris felt a sense of awe mixed with dread, and something within these ruins were far older than anything recorded in history. He leaned forward, his breath fogging the glass as he tried to take in the enormity of the sight. "Do you think this was here before Lunaris?" Mara asked quietly, her voice trembling with disbelief. Aris shook his head. This city wasn't built by the people of Lunaris. This is something far older." He turned to the technician. "Can you get us closer?" The technician, his fingers flying over the controls, responded, "We're getting interference from the ruins. The signal's weak, but I can manage. Brace yourselves." The submersible eased closer to the ocean floor, the beams of light cutting through the darkness. As they descended into the heart of the ruins, the walls of the ancient city seemed to come alive with strange carvings, symbols unlike anything Aris had ever seen. The architecture was both alien and familiar, as if it had been built by a civilization that had never fully left the ocean's embrace. When the submersible finally touched down on the ocean floor near what appeared to be a central plaza, the hum of the engines died down, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. The crew exchanged nervous glances. "Let's take a look outside," Aris said, his voice steady despite the unease gnawing at him. Mara, ever the scientist, was the first to unbuckle her seatbelt. "We're here, Aris. Let's uncover the truth." The hatch opened, and the crew donned their diving suits. The pressure outside the submersible was immense, but they had been trained for this. With careful movements, they exited the craft and began to explore the ruins. The sea was still, the water clear enough to see the bottom, but it felt like they were moving through a dream. As they stepped onto the coral-encrusted streets, Aris couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. The shadows seemed to shift, and the soft current around them felt like it was pulling them deeper into the city's heart. "What are these?" Mara asked, pointing to a set of strange markings carved into the stone wall. The symbols resembled a form of writing, but it was unlike any known language. Aris crouched to get a better look. "They look like a warning." He traced his fingers along the stone, and as he did, the wall seemed to hum with an energy he couldn't explain. The ground beneath them trembled slightly. "We need to go deeper," Aris said, his voice urgent. The pearl had guided him here, and he knew it was not by accident. Something was hidden beneath this city, something that could change everything. Mara hesitated. But we don't know what we're dealing with. There's something wrong here. I know, Aris replied, but we have to know the truth. The group continued through the ruins, moving deeper into the forgotten city. As they ventured further, the architecture grew more intricate, and the carvings on the walls became more detailed and cryptic. There were images of great storms, rising tides, and creatures with enormous glowing eyes. Then they came to a massive circular structure, an enormous chamber, the center of which was dominated by a pedestal of stone. Atop the pedestal rested another glowing object, similar to the Pearl of Eternity, but far larger. It radiated a golden light that seemed to pulse with life, beckoning them closer. Aris stepped forward, drawn to it like a magnet. "What is it?" he whispered. Mara was behind him, her voice barely audible. "I think this is the source of the power in the trench. This could be what controls the balance of the oceans." Suddenly, the chamber seemed to come alive. Aris felt the weight of the water around him, and an ancient voice echoed, pressing against his chest as though the ocean itself was alive. Aris couldn't understand the words, but the message was clouded with blackness. This was a warning, and for a moment he thought they had been swallowed whole. The ground beneath their feet cracked, and the room began to shake violently. "Brilliant. We have to get out of here!" and blinding, Mara shouted, panic rising in her voice, his eyes stinging as the darkness faded. The light from the pedestal flared bright, but everything had changed, and everything went black. The once still waters now rippled with an unnatural energy, and the ruins around them seemed to pulse with life. "We're still here, but something's wrong," Mara whispered, her voice strained. Aris looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening. The pedestal was still there, glowing with an intense golden light, but the walls, those strange symbols, now seemed to be moving, shifting like liquid metal. It was as if the city itself was awakening. "It's alive," he muttered under his breath. The ground trembled once again, but this time the tremors were different, more rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Then, from deep within the ruins, a sound began to echo, a low, rumbling hum, the sound of something ancient stirring from its slumber. "Aris, what is that?" Mara asked, her voice barely a whisper. I think we've just triggered something," he replied, his heart pounding in his chest. Before he could say more, a sudden force swept through the chamber, knocking them off their feet. They tumbled through the water, disoriented, as the light from the pedestal intensified. The currents swirled around them like a storm, pulling them toward the center of the chamber. "We need to get back to the sub," Mara cried, but it was too late. The force of the currents grew stronger, and the city itself seemed to be alive, pulling them deeper. The ground beneath them cracked and shifted, revealing hidden passages that had long been forgotten. As they were dragged toward one of the darkened tunnels, Aris caught a glimpse of something, an enormous shape in the distance, rising from the ocean floor. "Mara! Look!" he shouted. She turned, and her eyes widened in shock. Something massive was emerging from the shadows, a creature unlike anything they had ever seen. It had the body of an ancient sea serpent, with scales that shimmered like silver. Its eyes glowed with an eerie golden light, and its massive tail created a whirlwind of water as it moved. "What is that?" Mara breathed, her voice trembling with awe and fear. "I don't know," Aris replied, his voice low and tense. "But we need to get out of here." The creature moved toward them with surprising speed, its eyes never leaving them. It was like it was watching them, calculating its next move. "We can't outrun that thing," Mara said, panic rising in her voice. "What do we do?" Aris glanced around, desperate for a solution. His eyes fell on the pedestal, the source of the golden light. "We have to shut it down," he said urgently. "If we can destroy the artifact, maybe we can stop whatever is happening." Without another word, they swam toward the pedestal, their movements quick and frantic. The creature followed them, its immense body moving with an unsettling grace. Aris reached the pedestal first, his hand gripping the stone. The energy from the artifact surged through his body, but he gritted his teeth and pulled with all his strength. The pedestal shuddered, and for a moment it felt like the entire city was holding its breath. Then, with a mighty crack, the pedestal shattered, the golden light bursting into a blinding explosion. The creature let out a deafening roar, its massive form thrashing in the water. The currents intensified, pulling them toward the surface. Aris and Mara struggled to stay afloat, but the force of the water was too strong. They were swept away by the current, tossed around like rag dolls in the violent whirlpool. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The water calmed, and the light from the pedestal faded, leaving them in darkness. Aris gasped for air as he broke the surface, his lungs burning. Mara followed close behind, her face pale with shock. What just happened?" she asked, gasping for breath. "I don't know," Aris replied, his voice hoarse. "But I think we've just woken something ancient." The tremor was sudden and violent, knocking Aris and Mara realizing they were no longer in the heart of the ruin and twist around them, instead as if the entire structure of the cavern was beginning to unravel. Far from the submersible, dust and small fragments of stone rained down from the ceiling, replaced by the once stable floor began to crack under their feet. "Where did it go?" "We need to get out of here now," her voice barely above a whisper. Her voice barely audible over the growing rumble, his mind racing. Aris scrambled to his feet, back to the surface, reaching for Mara's hand. "Whatever we've unleashed, it's not over." They ran toward the door, the adventure but as they got closer, the ground split apart, sending them sliding in opposite directions. The force of the tremor threw them both to the ground, and the bright light from the door flickered and faded, leaving them in near complete darkness. "Aris!" Mara screamed, trying to crawl toward him. "Aris, where are you?" "I'm here!" Aris called out, his voice hoarse. He reached out, feeling the rough stone beneath his fingertips. The walls around them groaned, creaking under the pressure as the entire cavern seemed to shift, as if it were alive and fighting against the very foundation it had once stood upon. "We have to go, the door!" Aris gasped, scrambling to his feet again. But before he could finish his sentence, the walls cracked further, and a powerful gust of water rushed toward them, pushing them back into the room. Mara screamed as the water began to rise, flooding the room with an unstoppable force. They had no choice but to move toward the center of the cavern, away from the door. The once stable stone walls were now being torn apart by the pressure of the sea, and the ceiling above them began to collapse in giant chunks. "Over here!" Aris shouted, pulling Mara toward the center of the cavern. His heart raced as the water surged higher, quickly swallowing the lower half of the room. "We won't make it!" Mara cried, her breath catching in her throat. But Aris refused to give in to the panic that gripped him. He scanned the surroundings, desperately searching for an escape. His eyes landed on a narrow passageway in the back of the cavern, a small crack in the stone that led deeper into the heart of the ruin. "There!" he shouted, pointing to the passageway. "That's our only chance." Mara hesitated for a moment, fear flickering across her face, but then she nodded, and together they ran toward the crack in the wall. Water was already flooding the room faster than they could move, the current pulling at their legs and making every step harder. The passageway was tight, but it offered the only chance for escape. They squeezed through, the water rising around them, threatening to swallow them whole. The walls seemed to close in as they moved deeper into the narrow tunnel, and the sound of crashing waves filled their ears, drowning out everything else. "Keep going," Aris urged, his voice frantic as he pushed ahead. "We're almost there." Mara didn't reply, her breath coming in short gasps, but she kept moving forward, her eyes wide with fear. The passageway twisted and turned, and with every step, the water level rose higher. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and the light from Mara's orb flickered weakly, casting strange, ghostly shadows across the stone. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the end of the passage, and what they found there took their breath away. They emerged into a vast underground chamber, a cavern so large that they could barely make out its farthest edges in the dim light. The air here was thick and heavy, filled with an eerie stillness, and at the center of the chamber stood something that made Aris's heart skip a beat. A massive, ancient stone pillar, rising high above them, its surface covered in the same symbols they had seen in the ruins above. It was a strange, glowing obelisk, and its energy seemed to radiate through the very air, as if it were the heart of the entire underwater world. "Is this the source?" Mara whispered, her voice full of awe and fear. "I think it is," Aris replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He approached the pillar cautiously, drawn to it by an unseen force. As he touched the stone, a rush of energy surged through him, filling him with warmth and power. The symbols on the pillar began to glow brighter, Aris could answer, shifting and changing, rumbling voice filled the cavern. The air around the very walls themselves, and the ground beneath their feet. "You have awakened the heart of the ocean," the voice boomed. "We need to figure out how to stop this. You must face the consequences of your actions." His voice urgent. "If we don't, the whole city will be destroyed," vibrating in the very core of their beings, her eyes scanning. It was a voice older than time itself. How do we stop it? And it carried a warning. It feels like it's that was as ancient as the sea. Everything from the surface Aris to the depths and Mara of the ocean exchanged a glance, fear settling in their hearts. Whatever this was, it was no longer a simple quest for knowledge. They were now part of something much greater, a force that had been lying dormant for centuries. "We have to make a choice," Aris said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "And we have to make it fast." Mara nodded, her eyes narrowing in determination. "Then let's do it." The pillar pulsed once more, and the ground beneath them shook with power. The voice, deep and ancient, reverberated through the cavern, filling every corner of the underground chamber with its resonating power. Aris and Mara stood frozen, staring at the glowing obelisk. It hummed like a heartbeat, a constant reminder of the decision that now lay in their hands. "You have awakened the heart of the ocean," the voice continued, its tone both commanding and sorrowful. "But the balance has been disrupted. Only one of you can choose to restore it. The other must be sacrificed." Mara's eyes widened in shock, her breath catching in her throat. "Sacrificed? What do you mean?" The voice echoed again. "Only one can control the heart. Only one can bear its power. The other will be consumed by it, lost to the depths of the ocean forever. It is the price for restoring balance." Aris felt a cold chill grip his heart. He looked at Mara, his companion in this strange and perilous journey. Her eyes met his, filled with the same confusion, fear, and determination. "I can't," Mara began, her voice trembling. I can't let you sacrifice yourself for this. We've come so far. Aris shook his head. It's not just about us, Mara. It's about the whole city, the whole world above and below. If we don't make this choice, everything we've seen, the city, the people, the beauty of this place, will be destroyed. And I won't let that happen. Mara opened her mouth to protest, but Aris cut her off. I'm the one who's come this far. I'm the one who feels this connection to the heart. If one of us has to bear its burden, it should be me. Tears welled up in Mara's eyes as she stepped closer to him, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. Aris, please. We don't know what will happen. This power, it could kill me, Aris finished for her, but it could also save everything. We don't have time to second guess. The longer we wait, the closer the collapse will come. I've made up my mind. For a long moment, Mara stood still, her hand still resting on his arm. The energy from the pillar pulsed gently, the room vibrating in sync with their hearts. Finally, Mara let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging with the weight of their decision. If you're sure, Aris nodded, his face set with a determination he hadn't felt before. I am. As if in response to their words, the obelisk shimmered and glowed brighter, its energy intensifying with each passing second. The ancient voice returned, its tone softer now, almost as if it understood the sacrifice being made. Very well, the voice said. You have chosen your path. The heart will accept your offering, but be warned, the power it grants is not without its cost. Before Aris could respond, the pillar's light flared, blinding them both. The energy that had been contained within the stone rushed outward, enveloping Aris in a wave of heat and light. His body tensed as the power coursed through him, filling him with a sensation that was both overwhelming and familiar, as if he had always known this moment would come. The light dimmed, and for a few moments, Aris stood there, his body trembling from the power now coursing through him. His heart beat in sync with the pulse of the ocean's heart, and the world around him seemed to slow down, as if time itself had stopped. Aris, Mara whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. Are you? He turned to her, his eyes wide with the intensity of what he felt. I'm okay, but I can feel it now. The heart, it's a part of me. The air around them seemed to hum with energy as the pillar's light faded, her face leaving behind only the faint glow of the new resolve etched into its surface. Where do we go from here? Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to shake focusing on the pulse of energy inside him. It was different. He could feel the ocean's heartbeat were softer, distant, more rhythmic, but powerful, as if the entire cavern was breathing pulling him towards Aris's newfound something power. He couldn't yet understand. The balance is beginning to restore. We have to return to the surface, Aris said. He said his slowly, voice calm but filled with awe. We need to stop the collapse from reaching the city above. Me. The heart is the key to saving everything. We need to find a way to stop the destruction, but I don't know how much time we have left. Together they turned and made their way out of the chamber, the path now clear before them. The tremors that had once seemed so dangerous now felt like the rumbling of something deep within the earth. A force of nature that was both destructive and healing. As they stepped out of the chamber and back into the narrow tunnel, the sound of rushing water filled the air once more. Aris felt the weight of the power inside him, felt the ocean itself moving beneath his feet, guiding him. We're running out of time, Mara said urgently. I know, Aris replied. But we can do this. We have to. With a new sense of purpose, they began their journey back to the surface, knowing that the fate of both the city of Cremenos and the entire world now rested in Aris's hands. The journey back to the surface was far more treacherous than they had anticipated. The tremors grew stronger with each step they took, the very earth beneath them vibrating as if in response to the pulse of energy now coursing through Aris. The tunnels that had once seemed like a safe passage now felt like a labyrinth of shifting stone, as though the world itself was trying to resist their movement. "How much farther?" Mara asked, her voice strained with both exhaustion and fear. Aris didn't answer immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes, reaching deep inside himself to connect with the pulse of the heart. The power was overwhelming, filling him with a sense of purpose, but also a growing sense of urgency. He could feel the heart's rhythm becoming erratic, as if it were reacting to the chaos around them. "We're close," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "But something's wrong. The heart, it's reacting to the tremors. We need to hurry." Mara nodded, but her face was pale with concern. The last few days had been a blur of strange happenings, mysterious voices, and unimaginable power. She couldn't shake the feeling that something larger than both of them was unfolding, a destiny they could neither control nor fully comprehend. As they emerged from the tunnel into the large cavern that housed the portal back to the surface, the atmosphere shifted. The water that had once been calm and still now surged with an unnatural energy, its surface rippling violently as if reacting to their arrival. "What is happening?" Mara whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "The heart," Aris said, his voice tight with concentration. "It's destabilizing. It's trying to reach the surface faster than it's meant to. We have to stop it." He stepped forward, his senses heightened as he felt the presence of the heart growing stronger. The very air around them seemed charged with energy, vibrating with the power of the ocean. The portal before them flickered, its once steady glow now pulsing erratically. "This is it," Aris said, a note of urgency in his voice. "The heart is trying to break through. If we don't stop it now, it will consume everything." Mara grabbed his arm, her grip firm despite the fear in her eyes. "How? How do we stop it?" Aris closed his eyes, Mara's voice broke the rhythm of the ocean. He
You're
could
not
feel the
alone
heart's
in this,
power
Aris.
calling to him.
I'm
Its
with you.
ancient energy surging
Aris
through
nodded,
his veins, grateful for
He
her
reached out,
unwavering support.
his hands trembling as
he
he
drew a
placed
deep
them
breath
against
and
the
with a
shimmering
final surge
surface
of energy,
portal.
pressed his palms against the
feel
portal.
it.
He murmured. The world seemed
The heart
to
is
hold
part
its
of the
breath
ocean,
as the
but it's
power
more
of the
than
heart
that.
flared. It's
in
the balance
response.
of all things. The tremors
pulse of
intensify.
life itself.
The very
If we don't
ground
stabilize
beneath
it
their feet
now,
shaking
everything will
violently.
collapse.
For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the portal began to stabilize. The water surrounding them calmed, the surging energy ebbing as the pulse of the heart slowed. Aris felt the power inside him grow steadier, more controlled, and for the first time since he had accepted the heart's power, he felt a sense of balance. "We did it," Mara whispered, her voice full of awe. Aris nodded, his body still trembling from the intense energy that had surged through him. "For now," he said, "but we have to move quickly. We've bought ourselves some time, but the heart is still unstable. We need to reach the surface and prevent the collapse before it's too late." Together, they stepped through the portal, leaving the underground world behind. As they emerged into the open water, the pressure of the ocean above them pressed down, but it was a familiar weight, a reminder that they were once again on their way to the surface. The city of Cremenos awaited them, but the world they were returning to had already begun to change. Aris could feel the shift in the very air, a tension that seemed to hang over the city. The heart had been stabilized, but its power was still growing, and with it, the danger. The journey to the surface felt like an eternity. The swirling currents of the deep ocean pulled at them as they swam upward, their bodies aching from the strain. Aris could feel the weight of the heart's power pressing against him, pushing him to move faster, to reach the surface before the impending danger could overwhelm them. Mara swam alongside him, her movements strong but careful, as if she too sensed the growing tension in the water. The ocean around them seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy, the rhythm of the heart echoing in the depths. "We're getting closer," Aris said, his voice strained with effort. "I can feel the surface just ahead." Mara nodded, her face set in determination. "Let's make sure we're ready for whatever comes next." As they broke through the surface, the world above greeted them with its familiar brightness. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the ocean's surface, but the beauty of the moment was lost on Aris. The calm waters betrayed the growing storm he could feel, gathering on the horizon. The city of Cremenos lay in the distance, its towering skyscrapers reflecting the dying light of the day. It should have been a welcome sight, but the unease that gripped Aris made him question everything. The heart was still growing stronger, its pulse now felt even above the surface, and he knew that the world was on the verge of a catastrophic change. "Aris," Mara's voice broke through his thoughts. "What happens now?" "We need to get back to the heart," Aris said, his tone serious. "We've bought it time, but it's not enough. We need to stabilize it before it reaches its full potential." Mara's eyes widened. "You mean we have to go back down?" Aris nodded, his gaze focused on the city. "Yes, the heart is unstable, and if we don't act now, everything will be consumed. The city, the ocean, and everything in between will be caught in its wake." Without another word, they began swimming toward the city. The journey felt different now. The water was still, almost unnaturally so, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Aris could feel the presence of the heart, its energy growing stronger with each passing second, and he knew that they didn't have much time. As they approached the city's glassy dome, the lights within began to flicker. The familiar hum of the city's artificial climate grew erratic, a sign that something was amiss. The calmness of the waters was replaced by a strange current, pulling them toward the dome faster than they had anticipated. "Something's wrong," Mara said. They swam faster, voice laced with fear, their hearts racing as the energy in the water grew more intense. To the heart's with a final burst of effort, they broke through the surface, his focus pulling themselves on the dome, the city's entrance. As they stepped onto the city was visible now, the world but it wasn't as welcoming as it once had been. The vibrations of the surface of the water seemed to ripple the very walls of the city, distorting the view of the skyline of as if the very fabric of reality of human achievement, stretched, peace, and war now seemed like a "We have to get inside now," Aris urged, pushing forward with all his strength. Flickered and dimmed, casting long shadows that stretched across the streets. The air smelled different, heavy with the weight of impending change. "We need to find the heart," Aris said, his voice low and urgent, "before it's too late." Mara nodded, her eyes scanning the city as if trying to find a path that would lead them to safety. "Where do we go?" Aris closed his eyes for a moment, reaching out with his senses. The pulse of the heart was unmistakable now, a rhythmic thrum that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. "Follow me," he said, turning toward the center of the city. "We don't have much time." The city of Cremenos seemed to hold its breath as Aris and Mara made their way toward the heart of the metropolis. The streets, once bustling with the activity of millions, now lay eerily quiet. The hum of the city's machinery, which had always provided a constant backdrop to life, had faded into an unsettling silence. It was as if the very foundation of Cremenos was aware of the danger that loomed. Aris could feel the pulse of the heart growing stronger with every step. It reverberated through the ground beneath him, a constant thrum that seemed to be in sync with the rhythm of his own heartbeat. He glanced over at Mara, whose face was set in a determined expression, but he could see the flicker of worry in her eyes. "We're close," Aris said, his voice steady despite the growing tension. "We just have to reach the center." Mara nodded, her hand gripping his tightly. "We'll make it. We have to." The city's layout had always been a marvel, with its vast network of glass domes, suspended bridges, and glowing pathways. But tonight, it seemed foreign to them, as if the familiar streets were now alien. The lights flickered above them, casting long, distorted shadows across the ground, and the air felt thick with the energy of the heart. As they reached the central plaza, Aris could feel the heart's presence more intensely. It was as if the very city was alive, its veins pulsing with the life force of the heart. The massive central dome, which housed the heart, stood ahead of them like an imposing monument. Its glass surface shimmered, reflecting the glow of the artificial sun that lit the city. But something was wrong. The entrance to the dome was blocked, a shimmering barrier of energy rippling across the doorway. "The barrier," Mara said, her voice laced with concern. "How do we get through?" Aris stepped forward, his hand reaching out toward the energy field. It hummed beneath his touch, vibrating with an unnatural force. He could feel the power of the heart coursing through it, trying to keep them away. "We need to calm it down," Aris muttered to himself. "It's reacting to us." He closed his eyes, trying to focus on the pulse of the heart. It was wild, chaotic, as if it had been awakened and was now thrashing against its restraints. He reached deeper, tapping into the connection he had forged with the heart during his earlier journey. Slowly, the wild energy began to settle, its pulse growing steadier and more rhythmic. After what felt like an eternity, the barrier flickered and then dissipated, leaving the entrance to the dome open. Aris and Mara exchanged a glance before stepping forward, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Aris felt the energy of the heart pulling at him, urging him to approach. It was both inviting and dangerous, the walls made of shimmering glass that reflected the glowing pulse of the heart, Mara said at its center, her voice trembling. The heart itself now was a massive, glowing orb. Aris stepped closer to the heart, in midair, his hand by a network of intricate tendrils. "We need to stabilize it. Its light was both beautiful, the entire city will fall apart." Casting an ethereal glow, he reached out, that filled the room, his fingers brushing against the heart's surface. The moment his skin made contact, a surge of energy flooded through him, filling every part of his being with a powerful warmth. He gasped, his body trembling as he fought to maintain control. Mara stepped forward, her hand touching his shoulder. "Aris, what's happening?" "I'm connecting with it," he said, his voice strained. "It's trying to tell me something. It's more than just a power source. It's alive." The heart pulsed, sending another wave of energy through the room. Aris struggled to stay focused, his mind racing. This wasn't just a matter of calming it down. It was a living entity, one that had been awakened and now needed guidance. He could feel its confusion, its desperation to break free from the restraints of the city. "I need to understand it," Aris muttered. "I need to know what it wants." The heart's energy surged again, and Aris felt his consciousness stretch, as if he was being pulled into another realm. The walls of the dome seemed to fade away, and for a brief moment, he saw a vision. He was standing in an ancient, forgotten place, an underwater temple surrounded by the ruins of a once great civilization. The heart was here too, but it was different. Smaller, less controlled, pulsing with a soft, gentle glow. He saw the people who had built the city of Cremenos, their faces full of hope and ambition. They had created the heart as a means to harness the power of the ocean, to bring life and prosperity to the city. But somewhere along the way, something had gone wrong. The heart had begun to grow out of control, its power becoming too much for them to handle. The vision shifted, and now he saw the heart as it was now, a massive, uncontrollable force of nature. It had been awakened, and now it threatened to consume everything in its path. Aris gasped, breaking free from the vision. He stumbled back, his body shaking from the overwhelming flood of information. "Aris, what did you see?" Mara asked urgently. "The heart," Aris said, his voice low. "It's not just a source of power. It's a living being, and it's been awakened. But it's not ready. It's too strong." Mara's face paled. "What do we do?" Aris took a deep breath, his mind racing. "We have to give it back its balance. We need to restore the connection it once had with the ocean, with the world it came from." Aris and Mara stood before the heart, its glow pulsing with an intensity that made the very air around them hum. The weight of their mission pressed down on them, but Aris could feel a sense of clarity beginning to settle in. The heart was not just a machine or an energy source, it was a bridge between two worlds, one above and one below. And it was that connection that had been lost, severed over time. "We need to bring it back to its origins," Aris said quietly, his gaze never leaving the heart. "We need to connect it to the ocean again." Mara's brow furrowed as she looked at him. "But how? The ocean is so far below us, and this thing, it's not just a source of power anymore, it's a force of nature." Aris nodded, feeling the truth of her words. The heart had become something more, something alive, and it was up to them to help it find its way back to the balance it once knew. He stepped forward, his hand extending once again toward the heart. This time, he wasn't just reaching out to calm it. He was reaching out to understand it, to reconnect it with the very essence of life that had given birth to it. He closed his eyes, focusing on the deep, steady rhythm of the ocean, imagining the waves that had once flowed freely across the seabed, their motion creating a symphony of life. As his fingers brushed the surface of the heart, a wave of energy washed over him. This time, it wasn't a violent surge, but a calm, steady force, like the gentle pull of the ocean tides. He could feel the heart's pulse synchronizing with the rhythm of the ocean, slowly at first, but then faster, until it was beating in harmony with the deep, ancient song of the sea. Mara watched in awe as the glow of the heart shifted, becoming softer, more natural. The heart's glow as if it was breathing with the ocean's once erratic pulse, now steady. The tension in the room began to ease. The overwhelming energy of the heart charged with tension, now seemed to breathe in unison, and he let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It was no longer a force to be feared, but something to be understood. Something that had been lost, her hand was now finding its way home. What now? Aris stepped back, Aris turned, his eyes to face scanning the room, a sense of relief flooding him. The city will feel it now soon. We give it a chance to heal. Cremenos will begin to heal. We've connected it to the ocean. The power that once threatened to consume it needs to find its balance again. Nurture it. We've done what we can. Mara nodded, her voice filled with relief. We've saved the city. But as Aris turned to leave, a faint whisper seemed to echo in his mind, a soft, lingering voice that felt both familiar and distant at the same time. The heart is only the beginning. the voice whispered. "The balance you've restored is fragile. Do not forget. There are forces that still wish to see it undone." Aris shook his head, dismissing the whisper as a product of his exhaustion. He had done what he needed to do. The city would be safe for now. But as they exited the dome, he couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger than them was at play. The heart had been restored, but the journey was far from over. The first light of the next morning crept through the glass walls of the dome, casting long shadows across the city of Cremenos. The heart, now reconnected to the ocean's rhythm, had calmed, and the city felt different. There was a new energy in the air, calm, steady, and full of promise. It was as if the pulse of the city itself had found a rhythm that matched the ocean's ebb and flow. Aris stood on the balcony of his apartment, watching the city below come to life. The people, unaware of the struggles that had taken place in the depths, moved through their daily routines, their lives intertwined with the heart and the city that depended on it. But for Aris, there was no going back to the ordinary. He knew that what had happened beneath the waves had changed him forever. Mara appeared beside him, her gaze drawn to the horizon. "It feels peaceful," she said softly, her voice reflecting the calm that had settled over the city. "The heart is working as it should, and the ocean is no longer pushing against us." Aris nodded, but there was a quiet unease in his chest. The heart may have been restored, but the voice that had whispered to him the night before lingered in his mind. Something wasn't quite right. "You think we're safe now?" Mara asked, as if reading his thoughts. "I don't know," Aris replied, his voice distant. "The heart is restored, but there's more to this than just power. I feel like we've only scratched the surface of what's really going on." Mara turned to him, concern clouding her expression. "What do you mean?" Aris hesitated, his gaze narrowing as he looked out over the city. The heart was always meant to be more than just an energy source. It's a connection to something much older, something that predates even the founding of Cremenos. I think we've only just begun to uncover the mysteries that lie beneath. Mara's brow furrowed. "So what now? What do we do next?" Aris took a deep breath. "I think we need to go deeper. We've fixed the heart, but there's a whole ocean out there we don't fully understand. And I don't think the forces that tried to break the balance are done yet." Mara met his gaze, determination flickering in her eyes. "Then we'll find out together. We won't let the city fall again." The city of Cremenos had never felt more alive. But even as the streets bustled with energy, Aris and Mara felt the weight of the unknown pressing in on them. They had repaired the heart, but the world around them was still changing. One evening, and the ocean, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a soft orange glow, Aris received following week passed in a haze of calm and quiet. It was from an old friend. Aris and Mara spent a marine biologist exploring the outskirts who had been researching the deep ocean trenches around that might hint at the before the city's foundation. The heart had once restored on the unknown creatures and phenomena couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something, but over the years, far greater, her research had taken a strange turn. The message was simple but cryptic. There are patterns in the deep, Aris. Patterns that even the heart cannot explain. Aris shared the message with Mara, his mind racing. The heart may have restored balance, but if Kira's warning was true, there were forces below the surface that neither he nor Mara could comprehend. Something had been disturbed in the ocean's depths, something older and more powerful than anything they had encountered before. Without wasting any time, they made their way to the research center where Kira had been stationed. The building, situated on the edge of the city, was dark and quiet, the hum of machinery the only sound breaking the stillness. Inside, they found Kira hunched over a series of screens, her eyes glued to the data streaming before her. When she saw Aris and Mara, her face was pale, her eyes wide with concern. "I'm glad you came," she said in a hushed voice. "I didn't know who else to turn to." "What's going on?" Aris asked, his voice low. Kira gestured to the screens. "I've been monitoring the deep ocean trenches around the city. There's something happening down there, something that shouldn't be. The patterns I'm seeing, it's as if the ocean itself is shifting." Mara stepped closer, studying the data. "Shifting? What do you mean?" Kira paused, biting her lip. "The ocean's flow is being altered. There are forces beneath the waves, forces that are old, older than anything we've known. And they're waking up." Aris felt a chill run down his spine. "You think it's connected to the heart?" Kira nodded grimly. "I think the heart was just a part of something much larger, something much more dangerous. The balance you restored, it was never the entire picture. And now we've disturbed something ancient." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. The heart, the city, everything they had fought to protect, it was all tied to forces beyond their understanding. Aris and Mara exchanged a look. This was far from over. "We need to go deeper," Aris said, his voice resolute. Kira glanced up from the screens. "You don't understand. What's down there isn't something you can just study or fix. It's alive. And if you wake it up, there's no telling what will happen." But Mara's eyes gleamed with determination. "We don't have a choice, Kira. We've already come this far. We can't turn back now." The days that followed were filled with tension and unease. The message Kira had received, combined with the strange patterns she had discovered in the ocean's depths, gnawed at Aris and Mara. The ocean, which had always been a symbol of beauty and life for the city of Cremenos, was now revealing its darker side. The ancient, hidden forces that Kira spoke of were becoming more than just a whisper. They were a warning, and it was clear that the peace they had worked so hard to restore was at risk. In the quiet of the night, Aris and Mara made their decision. They would venture into the deep, beyond the boundaries of Cremenos, and confront whatever it was that lurked beneath. The stakes were high. If the balance of the ocean was disturbed any further, the consequences for the city, and perhaps the world, would be catastrophic. Kira offered to help. She had spent years studying the ocean's hidden depths and had access to technology that would allow them to dive deeper than anyone had gone before. The three of them gathered in the research center's command room, surrounded by maps, charts, and holographic displays. Kira had already arranged a submersible that could withstand the pressure of the deep ocean trenches. "Are you sure about this?" Kira asked as she double-checked the equipment. "Once you're down there, there's no turning back. The ocean is not a place to be taken lightly." Aris and Mara exchanged a glance. They had already come so far. As
They could
Aris
feel the
and
weight
Mara
of the world
climbed
on their
into the
shoulders,
submersible,
but they
Kira
knew
gave
there
them
was
a
no
final
choice.
piece of advice.
Remember,
"We don't have a choice.
the ocean is alive
Aris
in ways we
replied
can't
quietly.
understand.
Trust
The
the
city's
instruments,
future
but listen
depends
to your
on what we
instincts.
find down
If
there.
something doesn't feel right, the submersible
Don't hesitate
was a
to come
sleek,
back up.
silver vessel
The hatch
designed
closed,
to withstand
and the
the
submersible
crushing pressures
descended
of the
into the
ocean's
dark,
deepest points.
unfathomable depths of the
It was
ocean.
equipped with state-of-the-art
For
technology.
hours, they navigated
sonar,
through the vast emptiness.
deep-sea cameras, and
The ocean
sensors
floor
that would
stretched
allow them to
endlessly
map
below
and
them.
explore
And the only
underwater
sounds
terrain.
were the
soft hum of the vessel's engines and the occasional ping of the sonar. The walls of the trench around them seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if the very ocean was aware of their presence. "How far are we?" Mara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The weight of the ocean pressed down on them, a constant reminder of the dangers they faced. "We're close," Aris replied, scanning the readouts on the control panel. The readings had been growing more erratic as they descended. The energy they were detecting was unlike anything they had encountered before. It wasn't just a disturbance in the water. It was something powerful, something ancient, stirring in the depths. Suddenly, the submersible's lights flickered. A low rumble vibrated through the vessel, and the instruments went haywire. The ocean around them seemed to come alive, the pressure increasing as the readings spiked. "What's happening?" Mara exclaimed, her eyes wide with fear. Before Aris could respond, the ocean floor beneath them seemed to shift. A massive, shadowy figure moved beneath the submersible, so large that it blocked out the light from above. The pressure intensified, and the submersible was rocked by a violent jolt. "Hold on!" Aris shouted, gripping the controls as the submersible was tossed through the water like a leaf in a storm. The lights flickered once more, and then in an instant everything went black. Silence. The world outside the submersible was dark, void of the usual hum of life. It felt as though the ocean itself had swallowed them whole. Aris blinked rapidly, trying to adjust his vision to the darkness inside the cabin. The emergency lights flickered to life, casting an eerie red glow over the control panels. "Are you all right?" Mara's voice cut through the silence. Her hand was gripping the console, her knuckles white with tension. "I think so," Aris muttered, still trying to regain his bearings. "What happened?" The systems went haywire. Mara looked out through the thick glass of the submersible's viewport. The ocean beyond was impenetrable, a dense black mass with no sign of the strange creature or force that had caused the disturbance. Everything was eerily still. Whatever that was, it was enormous, Mara said quietly, her voice tinged with awe and fear. "Do you think it's the source of the disturbance?" "It could be," Aris replied, glancing at the radar. The sonar readings were still off the charts, fluctuating wildly as though the very fabric of the ocean was unsettled. "Whatever it is, it's not natural. We need to go deeper," Kira's voice crackled over the comms. "The anomaly is still active, and we're not far from it. You have to get closer." Aris glanced at the readouts. The ocean floor, once a steady incline, was now rapidly descending into a deep chasm. It was as though they were being drawn into a gravitational pull, as though the very ocean was beckoning them forward. "Are you sure?" Mara asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if we should go deeper. The energy down here, it's not like anything I've felt before." But there was no time for hesitation. The fate of Cremenos and the world was at stake. Aris knew what had to be done. He engaged the submersible's engines, and they began their descent once more down into the unknown depths. As they sank deeper, the pressure increased, and the walls of the trench seemed to close in around them. The water turned colder, and a strange hum began to reverberate through the hull of the submersible. It was as though the ocean was alive, a living, breathing entity with its own consciousness. Minutes turned into hours as they navigated the treacherous depths. The eerie glow of bioluminescent creatures flitted by, their light barely enough to pierce the darkness. They passed rock formations that seemed to pulse with energy, as though they were being
"We've found
watched
it,"
by
Aris
unseen
whispered,
eyes, his voice filled
then,
with awe. Without warning, the darkness
"This is
parted.
what we've been searching for."
Before them stood the source
The
of the
structure
disturbance,
appeared to be built
a
from a
massive,
material unlike
ancient
anything
structure,
found in the
half
modern
buried
world.
in the ocean floor.
It was smooth,
It was
almost
a city,
metallic,
or at
but
least
also
the remains
organic,
of one, as though it had grown
The
from the
architecture
very
was unlike
ocean itself.
anything Aris and Mara
The carvings
had ever
on the
seen,
walls were
with
indecipherable,
towering spires and
but there was no
intricate
mistaking
carvings
the
that
energy
glowed
emanating
with an
from the city.
otherworldly light.
It was a raw,
The city
primal
was
force,
older
the kind
than
that could
Cremenos,
reshape the
older
world.
than any known civilization.
Mara's eyes widened as she took in the sight. "This isn't just a city," she said, her voice trembling. "This is something much older and much more powerful. I think we've uncovered a lost civilization, a civilization that was buried for a reason." Aris nodded, feeling a sense of dread wash over him. The energy from the city seemed to call to him, urging him to explore further. But at the same time, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were intruding on something sacred, something that was never meant to be found. Suddenly, the submersible shuddered. The energy from the city was intensifying, and the walls of the trench began to shake. It was as though the very ocean was reacting to their presence. "We need to get out of here," Mara said urgently. "This isn't just an old city, it's a prison, and whatever was meant to stay buried down here has to stay buried." But it was too late. The ocean seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and from the depths of the ancient city, something began to stir. The submersible groaned under the intense pressure, its hull straining against the energy that radiated from the ancient city below. Aris slammed his fist against the console, trying to stabilize the submersible as it bucked in the water like a wild animal. "We have to get out of here. Now!" Mara's voice was frantic, her hands flying over the control panel, attempting to regain control of the vessel. But the more she tried, the more the submersible fought back, as if the very ocean had a mind of its own. Aris could feel the hum of energy coursing through the walls of the vessel, rattling his bones. He turned his gaze back to the viewport, where the underwater city loomed, dark and foreboding. Something was waking up down there, something ancient and powerful. "Is it possible that the city itself is alive?" Mara asked, her voice tight with fear. "That energy, it's like it's coming from the city itself." "I don't know," Aris replied, his voice filled with uncertainty. He looked at the radar. The readings were off the charts, fluctuating wildly, indicating a massive presence deep below. Whatever it was moving. Suddenly, the ocean trembled again. This time, the shaking was more violent, the submersible tilting sharply to one side. Aris and Mara were thrown against their seats as the vessel plummeted deeper into the abyss. The pressure was growing, the walls of the trench seeming to collapse in on them. "Brace yourself!" Aris shouted, gripping the controls with both hands. He fought against the pull of the trench, trying desperately to pull the submersible back to safety. But it was no use. The ocean had them now. The submersible was sinking faster and faster, the world outside the viewport becoming an impenetrable wall of darkness. Aris couldn't see anything beyond the trembling glass, but he could feel the pull, like a gravitational force, dragging them down into the heart of the deep. Then, without warning, the submersible was jolted to a stop. Aris's heart pounded in his chest as he wiped the sweat from his brow. The shaking had stopped. The vessel was now eerily still, suspended in the water. "Did we make it?" Mara whispered, her voice full of disbelief. She glanced out the viewport, but there was nothing but darkness. Aris was about to respond when a sudden flash of light illuminated the water outside. It was faint at first, like the glow of distant stars, but it was growing stronger, brighter. The glow shifted and pulsed, illuminating the ocean around them with an eerie, otherworldly light. And then, through the murky water, Aris saw it. A shape, massive and looming, moving slowly toward them. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its body was covered in glowing scales that seemed to shift and shimmer, casting strange reflections in the water. Its eyes were like twin orbs of
Aris
molten
tried
gold,
to reverse the
burning
submersible,
with an ancient,
but the controls were
intelligence.
unresponsive.
It was
The
a creature
creature's
of
presence
the deep,
was suffocating,
a creature
its
that had
power
been sleeping
overwhelming.
for millennia.
The energy from the city was
"We need
drawing
to
them
leave,"
in,
binding
Mara
them
said
to the ancient
urgently,
force
her
that had
voice
awoken
shaking.
from its slumber. Now,
As the creature loomed
but it was
closer,
already too
Aris
late.
realized something.
The creature
This was
moved
no
closer.
ordinary beast.
Its massive form
It was a guardian,
blocking out the
a
faint light
protector
from
of
the
the city.
ancient city. It was as
A
if
being
the
that
very
had been
ocean
created
had
to
become
keep
its
the secrets
domain,
of the ocean
and the
hidden
submersible
from the
was
world
nothing more
above.
than a speck in its
And now,
vast, ancient
the ocean was
world, calling for them to pay the price for their intrusion. The creature's massive, glowing form hovered just outside the viewport, its eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the very walls of the submersible. The pressure inside the vessel was becoming unbearable, as if the ocean itself was closing in on them, suffocating them with its weight. Aris could feel his pulse racing in his temples. The hum of the submersible's systems was the only sound, now drowned out by the powerful presence of the creature. Mara clutched her seat tightly, her face pale with fear. "This is it," Mara whispered, her voice trembling. "We're going to die down here." But Aris couldn't accept that. He couldn't let this be the end. He had to find a way out. The creature's eyes glowed brighter, and suddenly the submersible lurched forward. Aris's hands flew to the controls, trying to stabilize the craft, but it was as if the creature was controlling them now, pulling them deeper into the heart of the ocean. "We need to stop this thing!" Aris shouted, his voice filled with desperation. Mara's eyes were wide with fear. "I don't know how to stop it, Aris. The systems are completely malfunctioning. It's like the creature is hacking into everything." Aris cursed under his breath. He knew that they were facing something far beyond their understanding. This creature wasn't just a guardian of the city. It was a force of nature, a manifestation of the ocean's will, and it had been waiting for centuries to protect its secrets. The city of Cremenos, he realized, wasn't just a marvel of human engineering. It was a living entity, tied to the deepest forces of the ocean, and the creature was its protector. As they descended deeper, the submersible's lights flickered, and the water outside grew darker, more oppressive. Aris could barely see the creature now, but he could feel its presence, an unrelenting weight in the water around them. And then, something unexpected happened. The creature stopped moving. For a moment, there was an eerie stillness. The submersible was suspended in the water, trapped in a strange, silent void. Aris and Mara exchanged confused glances, unsure of what was happening. Had they been released? Or was this just the calm before the storm? Suddenly, the creature's eyes flashed brightly, and the submersible was rocked by a violent surge of energy. The lights inside the vessel flickered wildly, and the pressure outside reached catastrophic levels. The ocean was roaring now, the very currents around them twisting with an unnatural force. The creature was unleashing its full power, and the submersible was no match for it. Aris slammed his fist against the console. "We're going to die down here if we don't act fast." Mara's eyes locked on the radar screen, and a glimmer of hope sparked in her gaze. "Wait, there's something. I think I found it." Aris turned to her, desperate for any solution. "What is it?" Mara's fingers danced across the controls. "There's a frequency, an energy signature coming from the city. It's like a pulse, a rhythm. If we can synchronize with it, we might be able to communicate with the creature. Aris felt a surge of hope. Do it. Now. Mara's hands moved quickly, her focus absolute. The submersible systems hummed as she calibrated the frequency, aligning their technology with the ancient energy pulse emanating from the city below. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the creature's massive form shifted, its glowing eyes focusing intently on the submersible. A sound echoed through the vessel, soft, almost like a hum, a rhythmic pulse. The creature was responding. Leave this place. Aris's heart raced. The secrets of the city are not meant for your kind. The creature is listening. Go back to the world above. Mara continued to adjust the controls, sending the signal deeper. The words echoed the heart of the city, like a whisper. The pulse grew stronger, and the submersible began to vibrate with a strange energy. He understood now. And then the creature wasn't just protecting the city. The sound was not a voice in the traditional sense within it. It was more like a deep, hidden, resonant vibration that had been buried reverberated through the water for millennia, reaching into Aris and Mara's bones. Leave. They couldn't walk away from the greatest discovery of their lives. We can't go back, Aris said, his voice low but firm. We have to learn what the city is hiding. Mara looked at him, her eyes filled with fear. Aris, we can't fight this. It's too powerful. We have to leave. But Aris was already reaching for the controls, his mind made up. He wasn't going to let fear stop him. They had come this far. The city had its secrets, and he was going to uncover them, no matter the cost. The creature's eyes glowed brighter, its form shifting as if it were preparing for battle. The energy around them crackled, and the water began to boil with an intense heat. It was clear now. This was no ordinary guardian. It was an ancient force, a creature born from the very heart of the ocean, and it would not let them take its secrets without a fight. Aris and Mara had one chance to escape, or they would become part of the ocean's eternal mystery. As the tension in the submersible reached its peak, Aris and Mara realized that the creature's power was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The ocean around them seemed alive, pulsating with an energy that both terrified and fascinated them. The glowing eyes of the creature, now more intense than ever, bore into them, unblinking. It was clear that it was warning them, but it was also testing them. The weight of the ocean pressed down on them, both physically and mentally, as if the very depths were pushing them toward an unknown fate. We need to make a choice, Aris whispered, his voice tight with determination. Either we escape, or we face what lies ahead. Mara, her face pale with fear, nodded. But what if we don't survive the next step? What if the city is more than we can handle? Aris paused, staring into the creature's glowing eyes. His heart beat loudly in his chest. He understood now. The creature wasn't just a guardian. It was the protector of something far more powerful, something that could change everything they knew about the world above. It's not about survival anymore, Aris said quietly. It's about the truth, and we've come too far to turn back now. The creature's gaze shifted, and for the briefest moment, there was a flicker of understanding in its luminous eyes. The energy in the water seemed to settle, and the violent currents slowly began to calm. The submersible, guided by the ancient pulse, continued to descend into the abyss. In the distance, through the swirling darkness, Aris and Mara saw a glimmer of light, a soft, ethereal glow like the faint pulse of a distant star. It was the heart of the city, the source of its power, and the ultimate secret that had remained hidden for centuries. As they approached the glowing light, the submersible shuddered. The pressure outside became unbearable, and the glow grew brighter, almost blinding. But Aris couldn't turn back now. This was it, the moment of truth. And then, in the blink of an eye, the light exploded in a burst of radiant energy. For a fraction of a second, Aris felt the presence of something greater than the creature, something ancient and far more powerful. It was the energy of the ocean itself, a force that had been harnessed by the city of Cremenos, a force that could reshape the world. But before he could fully comprehend what was happening, everything went black. When Aris awoke, he was back on the surface. The submersible had surfaced, and the calm waters of the ocean stretched out before him. Mara was still unconscious, her face pale but peaceful. The creature, the city, and the energy pulse, they were all gone. But the truth, Aris realized, was still with him. The secret of Cremenos, the knowledge hidden beneath the waves, was now a part of him. And though the city was lost, its legacy would live on in his mind. As he looked out at the vast expanse of the ocean, a new sense of wonder filled him. The world was far bigger than he had ever imagined, and the ocean, with its mysteries, was just waiting to be discovered. Aris knew that this was only the beginning. What would Aris do with the knowledge he now carried? What would the world think if they knew the truth about Cremenos? The ocean's mysteries were far from over, and the final chapter of the city's story had yet to be written. Would Aris return to the depths, or would the truth stay buried beneath the waves forever?